Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my show. Before we get started, I am super pleased to announce the official Just Another Tinfoil Hat t-shirt available on charlesford.org. Not only am I simply honored to be included on the website, but also all proceeds from sales of this particular design go to yours truly. While you're there, make sure to check out all of the other fantastic t-shirt designs in the 4TN section. Truly the best selection of 4TN shirts on the planet. So, to get down to business, today we are going to be discussing the truly bizarre case of the Loveland Frogman, or Frogmen, as the case may very well be. So, the Frogman story comes from March 3rd of 1972. Loveland, Ohio police officer Ray Jacques was driving around 1 in the morning when he saw what he thought was an injured dog alongside the road. So, he slowed his vehicle thinking that the thing might walk in front of him. And, as often happens with people who experience the unexplained, he suddenly realized he wasn't looking at exactly what he thought he was. Instead of an injured dog, Jacques was shocked to see a strange, bipedal, 4-foot-tall, lizard-like creature, covered in leathery skin. This thing looked at him, then turned and jumped over a guardrail into an embankment by the nearby river. Jacques called his dispatcher immediately to report what he had seen, and continued on to the police station. Later that night, accompanied by a fellow officer, they returned to the area with flashlights and did indeed find bizarre scrapings in the hill leading down into the river. This isn't the end of the story, however. Around 2 weeks later, Jacques' partner, Mark Matthews, was around in the same area when he saw what he thought was an injured animal. So he stopped his car. Yet again, he locked eyes with the same creature which Jacques had reported, the strange 4-foot-tall bipedal lizard-like thing, which stood up on 2 legs, stepped over the nearby guardrail, and continued to run down into the embankment by the river. It was at this point that Matthews decided to shoot at the thing, and this is where the story gets weird. I mean, it's a frogman, of course it's weird, but this is where it gets weirder. In 1972, Matthews claimed that although he shot after the creature, it got away and lived to croak another day. However, after a couple decades of sworn silence, in later interviews, Matthews did indeed claim that he landed a shot on the beast and it ended up being a sickly iguana. How a sickly iguana could be bipedal remains a question I would really like to have answered. But to refute that notion is something from Ray Jacques himself. In an interview in It Came From Ohio, Tales of the Weird, Wild, and Unexplained by James Renner, regarding whether or not the creature could have simply been a very large frog or iguana, Jacques said, no, it couldn't have been, it was bigger. If that's not a horror movie line, I don't know what is. So as fantastic as these super monsterly sightings are, the story really doesn't start there. As a matter of fact, it starts 17 years earlier in 1955, March or April to be precise-ish. A short order chef by the name of Robert Honeycutt was driving home from work at 3:30 in the morning when he saw what he thought were 3 crazy guys praying alongside the road. So he slowed his car to see what these madmen were up to when he realized that they weren't necessarily men at all. Now, in a world populated by bizarre encounters with strange humanoids, this particular encounter is kind of a standout. Described simply by Honeycutt at first as fairly ugly, the things were about 3.5 feet tall and grayish in color, wearing what he believed was a garment the same color as their skin, which was tight-fitting on top and then loose and baggy on the legs. Their faces were taken up on the lower half by a large, straight mouth, which really helps them subscribe to the Frogman moniker. He said that it did look frog-like. It had no lip musculature underneath it. It was simply a long, straight slit across the bottom half of the face. Somehow their eyes were normal-looking, but they lacked eyebrows and a nose. However, and this is just one of those really bizarre, fantastic details that stands out, he said that on their bald heads were wavy lines of corrugation, like when a baby doll has textured hair. And these things were also lopsided. The right half of their chest was markedly larger than the left, and their right arm was longer than the left arm. Now, of these 3 creatures, one was in the front nearest the shoulder of the road. It had its arms up over its head and appeared to be holding something which Honeycutt described as either a rod or chain, which was emitting white and blue sparks which jumped from hand to hand. Now, as Honeycutt got out of his car to get a better look at these things, he said that the thing lowered whatever it was holding and set it down by its feet, almost appearing to tie something around its ankles. And, at this point, all 3 things simultaneously turned to look at him. Now, Honeycutt, somehow absolutely not freaked out by this at all, decided he wanted an even closer look. He said that the distance between his car and the creatures was about 10 feet, so he decided, hey, I'm going to walk around to the front of my vehicle. As he started to do so, the three beings made, again, a simultaneous and deliberate motion towards him. And it was at this point that Honeycutt received the impression that he shouldn't come any closer. He said that earlier on he had also received the impression that they were kind of focusing their attention on something in the woods. And even later on, after the whole experience, he said that it was kind of this feeling that he had intruded upon an operation in which the first figure was using whatever it was holding to signal something in the woods. Now, Honeycutt watched these weird little dudes for probably another 2 or 3 minutes, just absolutely amazed and unafraid of what he was seeing. He said that when he finally left, it was just to get someone else to see these weird little dudes that he had been watching. However, when he got into his car, he said that he was hit with the strong odor of fresh-cut alfalfa with a slight trace of almonds. Interestingly enough, he and a girlfriend would actually smell this same scent several months later as they were traveling down the road. As he was driving away from the scene of his encounter, that was when the terror of his experience kind of overwhelmed him. Some people claim that he may have even experienced missing time or lost consciousness. So, around 4 o'clock in the morning, he stood on the doorstep of the Loveland Chief of Police, John Fritz, to report what he had seen. And interestingly enough, that same night, the Loveland Ground Observer Corps had been receiving reports of 4 anomalous objects in the sky. Now, the Honeycutt encounter is pretty impressive, actually, for the relatively prolonged, close proximity observation of the entities involved. And something that comes to mind a little bit is the gray color of the skin and the weird texture of it almost calls to mind the Pascagoula entities, though of course the shape of the things is very, very different. But his encounter seems to also have the infamous Oz factor associated with it. Apparently, while he was in close proximity to these strange little things, he felt no fear whatsoever. It was only after he left the area, and after a possible, if not probable, period of missing time, or at least time he can't account for, that the genuine terror of the event just absolutely crashed down on him. And of course, had this been a couple centuries previous, the beings that he saw would have been termed goblins or gnomes. The implement they were carrying, a magic wand, which, interestingly enough, is a symbol that comes up very often in contact with UFO occupants. The fact that Honeycutt also believed he knew somehow what these things were doing there is also a really fascinating thing. Because, of course, telepathic communication is pretty much a side effect of contact, whether with UFO entities or ghosts or even cryptids. However, much like in the Simonton encounter, Honeycutt didn't necessarily claim telepathic communication. He didn't say that he received any messages. He said he just knew. Now, Honeycutt's would not be the last sighting of the year. In late June or early July, 19-year-old Carlos Flanagan, a volunteer policeman for the Loveland Civil Defense, was driving back into the city, and when he crossed the bridge over the Miami River, said that he noticed 4 small figures. They were about 3.5 feet tall and moving oddly, and he also noticed a terrible stench in the area. Immediately he drove to the station and reported the incident, and what happens next there's really some confusion about. Now, the police claimed that they had no involvement in this encounter. However, the chief coordinator for the Loveland Civil Defense, and also the head of the Ground Observer Corps, Frank Whitecotton, claimed that the police did indeed put up a cordon around the area as soon as they heard of the sighting. Add into this FBI involvement, and you pretty much have an X-file right here. Now, around the same time of this sighting, there was another encounter in the neighborhood of Loveland Heights. One Mrs. Emily Magnone claimed that she and her husband were awakened in the middle of the night by the barking of their dog, which was raising quite a ruckus, so they decided to get up and check the house. Although they found nothing trying to get into the house or anything like that, what they did encounter was a terrible swampy odor that was so bad that in spite of the warm weather, they decided to close the window. However, even with that measure taken, the stench continued, as did the barking of the dog. Now, while the Magnones had no visual on the creature, their neighbors actually did. The next day, the neighbor lady came over to tell Mrs. Magnone that she and her husband had been awakened by their dog as well, and so they got up to check and see if anything was the matter. The woman went to her back porch, and looking out in the yard, saw about 15 feet away a little man, about 3 feet tall, covered in twigs or foliage. As weird as that description is, the even weirder thing about this little guy is what he ended up doing. The neighbor lady said that she turned on the porch light to get a better look at him, and it vanished. She turned the light back off, it reappeared. She did this several more times, and each time she turned the light on, the figure would vanish. Each time she turned it off, it reappeared. Although large and by referenced as a cryptid, the longer history of the Loveland Frogmen, if indeed all of these different accounts are part of a cohesive history, which I'm not sure about, it does have some truly uncategorizable behaviors that it exhibits. I mean, the truth of it is, whatever the Loveland Frogman is or isn't, was or wasn't, one thing is for certain. Even if by some stretch of the imagination the 1972 sightings could be explained away by a poor, unfortunate, sickly escaped iguana, which, for the record, I personally don't believe they can be, all that means is that the 1955 accounts are something else entirely. It is really neat to see, though, that just in this one area, regarding figures that are similar, they were all of a roughly similar height, the 1955 sightings and the 1972 sightings, you have this thing move through the whole spectrum of paranormal belief. In 1972, it behaved in a very monsterly or creature-esque sort of way. And then in 1955, the Honeycutt encounter has long been referred to as a UFO occupant encounter, as has the Carlos Flanagan sighting. However, then you have the magical appearing and disappearing apparition of Loveland Heights, which calls to mind exactly that, an apparition. So it's really neat to see how in this just one area, you have this unexplainable thing kind of translated through the different modes of paranormal belief. Well, if you enjoyed this video on the bizarre frogmen of Loveland, please like, and if you're new to this field of crop circles, go ahead and subscribe to see what weirdness the future may hold. Till then, you can check out my podcast on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, also called Just Another Tinfoil Hat. New episodes every other Monday, and all past episodes either available for download there or on my YouTube channel here. And if you want to keep up with whatever else I might possibly have going on, you can go ahead and check out my website, which is also called, if you can believe this, justanothertinfoilhat.com. Till then, I am Zelia Edgar, signing off.
Doing.